Welcome to Synchronicity. Excuse the absence last week. What's a schedule anyway? There was a bonus episode. I would like to point that out. But, regular podcasting in 2024, that's cool. It's a vibe. It's a thing. There's so many podcasts now, too. There's always more and more and more. I saw on TikTok, there was a podcast talking about how, in the 70s, you could know all of the bands. You couldn't know all. But, there was a finite amount of music you basically had immediate access to, right? There were the hot bands that were for whatever type of music. You could know all of them. You could be like, I am aware of all of the bands making this type of music right now. It's how novel kind of music was at that point. Now, clearly that throughout history, there's always going to be that, right? There's great composers and you go see all the legendary ones. If that's in your era, you go see I'm just saying now you have access to everything that's there and everything before, and it's immediately accessible. It's a lot. It's a vibe. It's a thing. We're dealing with all of that subconsciously, by the way. Just that sheer access to information, data, energy, it's a lot. And no wonder, you can feel overwhelmed at times. This is certainly a vibe for parts of 2024. I think, overall, I would say that my read, the downloads, if you will, about 2024 seem to be a self-fulfilling prophecy at worst and just an accurate interpretation of how linear time is unfolding at best. It's up and down, but I think overall pretty good. It's a shift. At least there's movement. Even if it's chaotic movement at times, at least things are moving. And I think that's, better than just being stuck at home during virus times. That was weird. Remember we did that? I'm sure that was good for mental health and overall well-being too. That was pretty great. So don't know where it's coming from or when it's coming, but it's coming. That's kind of the vibe we are learning to catch again or catch for the first time. It's when you kind of have that spontaneous element of gratitude because something is, and it doesn't have to do with time. I mean, it does, because obviously if you're moving through it and it's not physically in front of your face, you're going to perceive that as a gap in time until it appears. But the knowingness that it's coming is independent of time. And that's the mechanism that kind of reveals or projects that thing onto the screen of reality. That's important to remember. And I understand that sometimes that's not easy to feel yourself into. That's why we practice. That's why we do things that help us remind ourselves that is possible. And it's also how we learn, I think, what is a very valuable lesson and an ongoing one in my life for sure, how to just kind of get more and more graceful and elegant. And if you're starting from a place like me where you're very inelegant at quite a aspects of dealing with reality, then you get to see the progress for sure. So we can be grateful for that at least. But that does seem to be kind of a large part of living, is recognizing that independent of circumstance, there's a level of kind of awareness and approach you can bring to it that doesn't take away challenging experiences, but flips the script a little bit or allows you to perceive as the script being flipped. Easy for me to say. Man, it's just, this energy, this year, I think is going to be very much 2 steps forward, 1 step back at times. I think that's just going to be a lot of people's perception of it. But the step back sometimes feels like going the wrong direction. And it's not. You are actually making progress in a lot of areas. It's just such a nebulous and uncertain time. And if collectively you believe in the idea of a collective unconscious, people are processing that. By the way, there are these woolly caterpillar infestations in upstate New York. I assume it's parts of the East Coast. It's this invasive species that I guess this guy was trying to bring over silkworms at some point. I don't know when it was, in the 70s, 60s, and brought over these caterpillars that allegedly would make silk because they hang from trees. But it got out of control, and he introduced this fucking species of caterpillar that is now kind of like cicadas. There's times where it's just an explosion in population. That's what's going on now, which is fine. It's these little caterpillars, no big deal, except these things. And I didn't believe it at first. will give you like a histamine itch from their hairs on them. And they're super small to begin with. Then they get big and then they turn into moths and it's like super annoying. But anyway, I started getting like an allergic reaction, and I don't really get rashes, but I must have had some of this stuff on clothes or somewhere I had sat, and totally getting an itchy rash. And it sucks. There's few things worse than an itchy rash. I mean, there are many things worse, let's be honest. Like most things are worse, but it's annoying. You know what I mean? Anyway, I digress. That's what. Oh, by the way, I announced this on the Patreon, I think free tier, and on the bonus episode. I don't know if I did it on the public episodes, but we're doing Mystic of the Month starting in May. I'm probably going to record this at some point next week before I go to Turkey, which is going to be May 20th to like June 11th. Probably put out an episode or two of this there. If you want to stay connected in audio form and whatnot, then the Patreon is the best place to do that. But the Mystic of the Month, I'm actually really excited about. I may turn this into like just a separate extension of Synchronicity, because it feels like it could be a pretty cool vehicle for stuff. Where basically we're just going to focus on one person each month. This is the first month. We'll see how it goes. I think the first installment is going to be just like a long form breakdown and kind of interpretation of a mystic. For the month of May 2024, we're doing Milarepa, who is a Tibetan yogi mystic Buddha, right? And that one of my favorites, and also just like a very, I think, accessible archetype for a lot of people. And so we'll be talking about him and kind of his views. Also the intersection of like the imaginal stuff and Buddhism. Like there's, seemingly a conflict in terms of desire being something to be eliminated and ceased in most forms of Buddhism. And especially from Neville Goddard's interpretation, and especially a Christian mystic or new thought perspective, desire is a vehicle. It's something that will allow you to see the nature of the Godhead. And so looking at that intersection and seeing how mystics throughout time kind of are saying the same thing, even if the semantics or even seemingly big sticking points may exist. All of them are kind of saying, they are saying the same thing. So that's what we're going to be doing in May. You can sign up for that. I think that's the $7 tier. I don't think that's what it's going to be. The $7 tier for the Mystic of the Month. And then I think in the future, I'm just not like committing to anything too crazy over the summer because my travel plans are fucking nuts. Like it's insane how many flights, international flights I'm taking this year. Going to be in Turkey, in Germany, in Italy. It's a thing. It's like basically like being on tour minus the actual doing the tour stuff or anything. But I think after that, we may turn it into like a more like weekly discussion on the live streams. We'll talk about it, but just kind of like fleshing it out into multiple parts. But I think, initially we'll do at least like an hour on each mystic. And mystic is vague, right? That can be a musician, someone like Milarepa. It could be anything. So I like the format. And it also gives me a great excuse to like delve back into various thinkers, philosophers, mystics, which is always a good thing to do. Just as like a general practice, something that really helps, even if it's just an audiobook or just like listening to people talk about divinity or luminosity or a philosophical structure that resonates with you, or metaphysical structure, is good to do. It's like a vibratory frequency that aligns you with that, or it can repel you. It doesn't have to be. But I feel like there are at least subtle, if not overt, benefits from doing that. So if that's something you've not done or have fallen out of practice with, maybe give that another shot. Okay. The shift from perceiving challenging situations as like harbingers of doom to potentially exciting opportunities, like appreciate that. Because it's not always a mindset that we naturally fall into. When the shit hits the fan, when things feel like they're not working, when you're having a hard time, when maybe things have gotten out of control, when you're overwhelmed, it's really easy to perceive everything as like, okay, here comes the shitstorm again. It's very easy to fall into that pattern. thereby perpetuating the shitstorm, which is the rub. And it's very annoying that it works like that. Why do we have to be the ones who kind of pull ourselves out of that? Why can't someone else do it? And sometimes we do get that benefit of like community or another person or a support system or like a creative endeavor pulling you out or extending a hand out of kind of a metaphysical rut. But some inside job, like, truthfully, that is kind of how it works, and it can be annoying that that's how it works. Let's not kid ourselves. It can suck. It's like, why do we have to do this ourselves again? Why do we have to believe these things? Because that's precisely kind of the process of what's going on. You are yourself, God waking up as yourself, right? It's like, that's the process of living. We could say loosely the process of dying or letting go of an aspect of your physical form, and then maybe an astral form, and however many layers of consciousness you want to look at it as, is the returning of that process. So you merging into the Godhead, right? And the reverse process of that is God kind of going into you, right? Which is, you are the same. Does this make sense? Yeah, I think it makes sense. This used to be insane talk, by the way. Now, it's also really interesting to like see how this stuff evolves through time. And this used to be, this was like really weird stuff that people did not want to hear about. And now people, not that everyone wants to hear about this now, but it seems to be more accepted, which unfortunately sometimes makes me not like it when there's too much of it. It's like, all right, let's pull back. Let's be more conventional. Although that never really works for me. So I will say this, like, don't necessarily expect your desires or your wish or your feelings that you have kind of like really felt and either used an imaginal technique to happen overnight. And I think overnight is the key part of this, right? This gets into the question of time and a technique, right? And we perceive time as linearly when we're moving through it. Now, when we go retrospectively in our imaginations or just our memories, we are going back in time, right? That is something that's happening. Even if you're just like, well, it's just a recollection, you're not really doing that. No, but you are. That's where your consciousness is located at that point. So when you're looking back there, that is a form of time travel. That's why the revision techniques can be really, worthwhile, because you kind of loosen up energy that seemingly is anchored in the past, which then affects your present, which can then also affect your future outlook. So that's why the revision techniques, I think, are some of the most powerful that you can do, and just generally good for challenging situations that may have happened in the past, so you don't feel defined by a particular narrative, right? But this idea that things have to happen on your timeline, that's not really what it's about. It's like when you firmly accept that it has happened, or it feels like that, and maybe circumstances help you believe that. Maybe that's just something that's true. I think you will find there are periods where you recognize it's working the other way, though, where like your internal conviction and belief and expectancy created the conditions that allowed you to believe, seemingly, rather than the conditions allowing you to believe the thing in and of themselves. Do you know what I mean? It works both ways, but I mean, it does. I think when you catch on to that active mechanism, that operative power, then you have a chance to play around and experiment. And that's where I think this stuff gets interesting. It's aligning that with kind of a framework. I hesitate to call it moral framework, although morality and morals and ethics are certainly a part of it. But it's like a multi-perspectival view on the nature of existence and kind of non-existence that really makes that a profound realization. And sometimes you just glimpse it. Sometimes you take some acid, or you go too far in a K-hole and you glimpse it, or you smoke some DMT or whatever it is, or you meditate super good and super long. Sometimes you get glimpses of it, right? That Satori experience of like, oh, wow, there it is. But to dwell in that space, is a big choice. And I don't think most people are alive or perceiving things in physical reality to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like, then you're kind of like That could be your thing, but that's probably not why you're here. You're probably here to experience stuff. Otherwise, what would we be doing? Truthfully. What actually? It's also weird sometimes your brain will just be like, hey, let's make crippling self-doubt great again. That's, something we're going to be doing right now. And I understand that we can't always recognize when that's going to happen. When you notice you're kind of doing that thing where you're letting either paranoia or doubt or fear or worry or anxiety steer your ship, you just got to be like, you chill out, brain. What's going on, mind? Can we tone it down just a little bit? There's a gentleness in the same way you'd be gentle with a child. And don't get me wrong, when your kids are going apeshit and, you will lose it with them once in a while. But you, on the whole, I would hope, are gentle with children because you understand that they are new to experiences. The same kind of gentleness, if you can extend that to yourself when you are being harsh on yourself. And harsh doesn't just mean mean, right? It can mean worrying a lot. Just kind of obsessing about things in a way that doesn't feel productive. It doesn't have to be an element of meanness or intent of malice there. It can just be giving yourself a hard time, making sticky situations for yourself that you don't necessarily want to be in. Yeah, let's take it a little bit easy. That's how you navigate, I think, turbulence in your own life and mind most gracefully. That's the way to kind of do it, which is not always easy, especially if you kind of allow yourself to get influenced by stuff going on in the world. And we all do this, right? And we know this is going on right now. We're gearing up for the political stuff in the United States. I just saw that RFK said he had a dead worm in his brain that ate his brain at some point. They're really putting out the crazy stories of RFK. And maybe he said that. I don't know. That seems weird. But I'm not voting, as I normally do not, because I believe that the political system is essentially a staged theater thing. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just if you can find out where your vote is really counting, it's probably not at the presidential level. But say you are in a swing state and you are in a county that really kind of has an influence of where your state, sure, there's a case to be made that you should be voting for people you believe in. It's just who the fuck really cares at this point? It's Trump or Biden. It's like a replay. Everything's been said about it. There's nothing else to say about it. Anyway, that's a thing that's going on. You got the Israel-Palestine thing. I spoke about this on the Patreon. I learned to gate my opinions on things like that behind there. But, there's a lot of stuff that's vying for your attention right now. We got Kendrick and Drake going at it. I got to say the BBL Drizzy beat, though. But the original artist was King Melonius, and then Metro Boomin's remix of it was stuck in my head for a solid day. It's well done. It's good stuff. But Kendrick and then The Weeknd is doing shit. There's a lot of shit out there kind of pulling your attention. And then whatever else is going on. That's just the main, I feel like that's the main stuff that they show on my feeds. You may be hyper niched into some weird, I don't know, it could be furries. It could be some furry, crazy situation, on Reddit where these furries did this thing that's against the furries policy. And furries aren't even that weird anymore. There's probably way weirder shit that I have no idea about because I don't know where to go to find the weird stuff anymore that, people are doing. It's a weird, wild place out there. And that's okay. But for yourself, trying to kind of set the compass of your direction right now feels important. It feels like having some arrow for you to traverse through time, at least guided by your feelings. And it doesn't always have to be what feels good, but by something you deeply care about, pointing your arrow in that direction is the first step, right? And that's kind of where I just think the desire comes in. And I've thought about this a lot. Listen, I just listened to the whole Life of Milarepa, reading the 100,000 songs of Milarepa. This is real deal Buddhist perspectives about the nature of, emptiness and luminosity and these big concepts of grasping and aversion and, how this life is illusory and any clinging to it is bound to bring suffering. And there's a lot of truth in a lot of those things, But desire is viewed as something that's going to be stamped out. We're going to save it for the Milarepa stuff, but just to kind of link them, desire also, like, are you going to stamp that out in your life? Are you going to be the person who will be unaffected by any relationship you have personally because you fundamentally see it as like this passing illusion? Is that going to be your experience and your true experience of it? If that's your goal, go for it, go eat, survive on nettles like Milarepa, but as an archetype or an energy to kind of look up to, how to exist in the world, to me, seems to involve some aspect of desire. Now, those desires can be the desire for, realization. It can be the desire for world peace. It can be the desire for harmony, or for your actions to be an extension of unconditional love and the truest and best version of yourself, whatever that means to you. And also it could be a version that's accepting of all things in the world, right? But it could also just be like, I want that fancy fucking car. Now, does the fancy fucking car, is there anything wrong with it per se? No, it's actually an aspect of God consciousness, just like anything else. Is that fancy fucking car going to solve all your problems? No, but it might solve your fancy fucking car problems. So it's just, there are levels of desire that I think are important to flesh out. And even if all are eventually illusory, because this world, much like a dream, is fleeting. We've stretched out the time kind of incomprehensibly long from like a single point. It's like stretching a point on a piece of paper and like going 2-dimensionally and expanding it out to 3 and 4 dimensions, and the 4th dimension being that extension of time through a period. That's kind of what we're going through. It's like we perceive it as fast. Things are fast. We've measured it in milliseconds and nanoseconds. Look how fast this thing is moving, this time. But really, it's quite slow. Like, this is a pretty dense physical plane. Now, a lot of what I think is going on right now, just intuitively, and what downloads have been coming to me, is there is a process of recognizing when energy tends to get stuck, not just in your physical body, but your etheric field, whatever you want to call it, your aura, your spiritual body, your astral, all these different things. Allowing that to pass through, or having a way to get that energy out, is incredibly important. The more energy and the more kind of stuff that you don't allow to kind of filter through, I think that's when we start dealing with anything ranging from, physical issues to, emotional issues, to reality being very weird. There's just like stuff that can happen. So developing some type of protocol for flushing that energy, like, it doesn't have to be a colonic. It could just be like clean eating equivalent of energy work. I think as people are becoming more aware of, because I think the uncomfortable moments of not processing energy are almost becoming unbearable for people. And I think this is also, you see this with like the polarities of sides, like the binary, like for and against. It's like, it's just digging in and making things more and more dense with less and less nuance and wiggle room. And that doesn't really work for people. It's not how we're built. You can do that as a way to kind of get yourself through life and time. But from a fulfilling standpoint, like, that pattern probably isn't going to satisfy you for the duration of a human life, which is, they can be very short. So maybe it can. My point is that the ability to clear and first become aware, then process, then clear energy. It sounds so woo, but it isn't as woo as it actually is, right? For some people, this is therapy and just talk therapy, where you're getting the stuff out, kind of just like, like, it's a cathartic process for people. Now, whether that process actually helps alleviate in the long run, who knows? But that's also what a lot of spiritual plot processes are as well. They're not going to fully eliminate, like, they're not the thing that eliminates a problem, because that's not actually what's going on. It's not good or bad. It's not only give me that. The problems, are huge opportunities for growth and insight. That's challenges bring those kind of elements with them. A life of stability and comfort and ease usually is not going to bring profound, transcendent opportunities for growth. It can. It certainly can. I'm not implying that it can't, But those situations where things work a little bit differently than they have before or how we thought they would, that's where you actually, level up in a way until you level down. Anyway, my point is that this process that we are going through now has a lot to do with allowing things not to accumulate like plaque on arteries in like our spiritual, physical, mental, emotional fields. That seems to be a big lesson because that makes sense, right? If we are moving towards a collective world where we're trying to be authentic, compassionate, wise versions of ourselves, there would need to be a element of sensitivity. And initially, when you become more sensitive to something, you can perceive it as pain or an itch or something like that. And you've just become more sensitive to it. Now, you don't want to become so sensitive that everything rubs you the wrong way, but then maybe you develop ways to kind of deal with that. I find it very interesting. This year, I don't seem to have allergies outside of these caterpillars. It's just reserved for that. But usually I get blasted with allergies. And I've noticed this at different points in my life. Sometimes I was allergic to cats. And you could say, oh, it's based on your diet. It's based on your, who knows? Whatever it is, okay? That's not for me to kind of figure out at this point, because sometimes there's no discernible changes in my behavior outside of my mood and my kind of, outlook and perception on things. And it's like the girl who was singing about how she cured her liver disease on TikTok. I think her name was Shannon Blake. And she was, she's kind of annoying and like a caricature of like a hippie Zoomer, DMT, shroomed out, whatever you want to call it. But there's truth and there's elements to being able to heal your body and heal various aspects of yourself through alternative means that maybe don't make conventional scientific or medical sense. Do you think you should just eschew those things and throw them away like from day one? No, maybe work yourself to that point. Maybe work with and see how easy it is for you to believe new paradigms of thinking, new ways of perceiving things. If you are very skeptical and need a ton of kind of evidence and proof, maybe don't make the leap from saying, I don't need to take medicine ever again. Maybe don't do that. Maybe kind of, work your way up to that. And a lot of what we're going through is working our way up to various levels of realization. And that's what 2024 is. I got to say, the shift from the end of Mercury retrograde, which was towards the end of April, it was like the 24th or the 25th of April, was a big shift in energy for me in the positive. Just automatically just felt more physically motivated, emotionally, psychologically, just energy levels started to get better. And, I don't know if that's the way it is for everyone, but that felt like a big kind of pivot point. And appreciate those things. One thing I've learned to do, especially as I get like older, is appreciate when things are going well and just be like, shit, this is, I remember when things didn't feel this great. No, just appreciate it when you're in that. It helps sustain it. That gratitude you have for that will certainly extend the half-life of whatever you are transiently moving through in reality. Was there anything else I needed to say? I've made my schedule known for this podcast. Listen, 3-4 episodes. One thing that I'm curious for you too. One thing I've noticed is that I am less rigidly attached to creative schedules. I'm allowing space in between episodes and just things that I'm doing creatively without judging that. I think if you try to rigidly, again, stick to a thing, this year it's going to be like kind of frustrating. Doesn't mean there's not a time and place for that. I certainly was pumping out a ton of these episodes, but like being in tune with that, I've spoken about red light and green light energy before. Being in tune with that is going to be your friend, especially for this year, and could be 25, 26, 27 too. There's a lot of oscillations going on right now. So allow yourself to kind of move into the things and experience the things you're supposed to. I can speak from recent experience, sometimes doing less or different things that may not seem specifically related to your goal or your desire can yield wonderful results. Sometimes focusing too much on something has a repellent force, especially if you notice kind of your mental diet or your mood at that time is maybe not in the best place. Maybe don't focus on the thing that's really important to you when you're in that state. Something I spoke about in the bonus episode last week was like using negative, quote unquote, negative feelings or ideas as a tool to lead you towards a desired outcome, right? Not everything that leads to the thing appearing in your reality is going to be happy, amazing, I did it. You could be frustrated at times. An amazing thing can happen and you could be frustrated on the way to do it. You could be on the way to your favorite roller coaster ride ever and you've heard it's the best thing ever and you love roller coasters, but then there's a line to get to the roller coaster and you're frustrated and you're impatient. Doesn't mean the roller coaster ride is going to be any less thrilling and amazing and cool and awesome, but you had a level of impatience leading up to it. You can have impatience leading up to your outcomes, to your desires, to your experiences, to your feelings. That's okay. It does not have to be a positive mental attitude. Does not mean you have to be some dumb navel gazing kind of like semi R word. I get in trouble every time I say the R word on this podcast. I think because people think that they're like, I have a greater sensitivity to the power of words than I do. But I'm doing that for the people who've complained. I will probably use that word at other times. It is not meant to be disparaging in any way. And I understand why some people feel that it is, especially for people who have that kind of, have dealt with that in their personal lives, but it's never meant pejoratively. And I hope we can get to a point where we understand that. Yes, privilege is a thing, but also allowing people to express themselves in a way that is not meant to cause harm, but that's a judgment for everyone to make, and who hears and perceives something. But anyway, I forgot the point I was making. Whatever I was saying, that was the point for it. That would be the best podcast ever. Someone who had just like a memento short-term amnesia and couldn't remember any of the points that they were making. It's also called smoking weed sometimes. And they were just like, that's the point. Whatever I said, that's what it was. It could be like something horrible about like genocide and some horrible belief. And it's like, that's the point and I meant it. But I don't think that's what it was. Anyway, I think by the time I start forgetting what I was talking about, we're nearing the end of the episode. Patreon is the best place to be to stay connected. That's patreon.com/synchronicity. Is there anything else going on? We have a live stream next week. Before I go, I'm not going to be on the boat the first month in Turkey, so internet should be normal. Later in the year when I go in July and August, it gets shakes. It gets weird. But I'll also be traveling all over the place. I'll do live reports from exotic locales as evidence that this stuff works. Just be grateful for what's around you. Like, just try. Your life is probably better than you think it is when you're not feeling great, and if you go through those moments, just find what you need to do. It can be anything at all. I do recommend, for those who want to follow along, grab the Life of Milarepa. It's really worthwhile. It was written in the 15th century, so like 400 years or so after Milarepa was born and existed. But it's considered kind of like a weird biography, semi-autobiography, because the guy who wrote it thought he was an incarnation of Milarepa. Really cool. It's cool. One of Milarepa's best quotes is, he said that anyone who said that Milarepa loved gold, may they have shit in their mouth, which is like, it's a pretty harsh stance on gold. But the point is that all of the gold, all of the silver, all of the world's riches are meaningless in the face of true dharma or realization or the path or like a Buddha perspective on the true nature of reality, which is not to be like an elitist standpoint, but when you recognize kind of what conditional relative reality exists compared to absolute reality, gold would be pretty meaningless. Doesn't mean you shouldn't use, you use gold. You have fun with money. I do crypto stuff. It's fun. Just don't get so caught up on it that you love it. You can still deal with it. Anyway, cool stuff. All right, guys, I'll see you next week. Maybe. Bye-bye.